Hey, everybody, welcome to podcast episode 10. Today, we're going to be talking about an interesting subject: the gap between expectations and reality. Basically, it's that most disappointment in life doesn't necessarily come from reality itself, but it tends to come from this gap between what we have been taught to expect and what reality actually is. So people don't quit businesses, they don't get divorced, they don't change careers, go on a diet or stop a diet, or quit goals simply because they're impossible. They quit because reality feels different than this fantasy in their head. So most people don't have a reality problem. They have an expectation problem. And we need to separate the difference. For example, nobody dreams about arguing inside of a marriage or a good friendship. Nobody dreams about making payroll if you're a small business owner. Nobody dreams about the bad months that you'll experience. Nobody dreams about the plateaus that they'll experience in the gym. Nobody dreams about slow growth. And also, nobody dreams about rejection either. So why is this? It's because we have been built emotionally to imagine the outcomes instead of imagining the actual process. And because of that, reality often feels like failure in some aspect, in some way. But in reality, it's actually just normal. Most people don't quit because things went wrong. They actually quit because things went normal. So, I want to talk about this gap between expectations and reality, and why the gap is actually what is responsible for far more disappointment than a majority of people actually realize. So let's get into it. Fantasy always seems cleaner than reality itself. Because let's face it, every goal actually has two versions. So we have the fantasy, but then we have the actual lived experience. So here's some examples. You have business. You have the fantasy of, well, I'm going to be my own boss. I'm going to run my own company. I'm going to live by my own rules, and no one's going to tell me what to do, how to do it, when to do it. But the reality of it is, with that comes a ton of stress and paperwork and administration and payroll and taxes. And honestly, depending on your industry, nasty customers because you just can't please everyone. Now let's segue into relationships. The fantasy is romance, right? But the reality of it is the romance needs to be seeded and it needs to be sowed. It needs to be constantly developed and maintained over time through communication, compromise, boredom, and honestly, sacrifice, general sacrifice. So that's the reality. Now, in fitness, especially among men, they want the six-pack abs. Now, whether you're one of those guys or not is beside the point, but that's the fantasy. But the reality of it is eating and consistency. Consistency is the key. And also, it depends on your inherent body type. Some guys really would need to lose a lot of weight to actually have a six-pack that shows. The popular belief is that if you have a six-pack, you're not fat, right? Well, technically that's true, but some people actually have thicker layers of skin than others. So you can have very little body fat, single digit to low teen % body fat, and still not show a six-pack if you have thicker skin. But that doesn't mean you don't actually have a six-pack. For example, many powerlifters, for example, like World's Strongest Man competition, many of those guys have way developed six-packs, but it's underneath all that skin and all that other fat layer that they have. But they have a six-pack, you just can't see it. So there's fantasy and reality and everything. And then with parenting, for example, the fantasy is, well, I'm going to have kids. I'm going to have these hallmark moments. I'm going to be able to get them on the bus for the first day of school, for first grade. And it's going to be great. And, I'm going to get to watch them grow up and graduate high school, and they're going to become a rocket scientist or a doctor. They're going to make a lot of money. But the reality of it is that all may happen, but in order for it to happen, it requires a lot of money and it requires sacrifice as well. So you have exhaustion coupled with responsibility. That's real parenting. So basically, people tend to fall in love with these outcomes of fantasy. But really, what they're doing in the meantime is they're simply underestimating the process. And social media nowadays absolutely distorts these expectations because nobody posts about the bad quarter or the marriage counseling sessions or their anxiety or rejections or failures. So we compare our personal behind the scenes to everyone else's highlight reels. And the result is that normal struggles tend to feel abnormal. So comparison doesn't just steal your joy. It actually creates unrealistic expectations. So for example, a lot of these creators, especially on the TikTok platform, they will create videos. It's actually curated. For example, there's one guy out there has several million followers, and honestly, his content now looks pretty fake, and people are commenting and saying, hey, bro, this is completely looking fake now. It's Jack Doherty. And, you look at his stuff and it's like, bro, nobody believes that stuff. And for example, he goes in one of his videos, oh, let me show you my new crib. It's about $12 million. Well, actually, bro, your crib was $3.75 million. Now, I'm not saying that that's still not a lot of money for a house. The point is, in the video, he says it's worth 4 times the amount that he actually paid for it. And then at the end of the video, he's like, oh yeah, look at my view out of my balcony of LA. It's like, bro, you're in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. You're not in LA. So it's just things like that. Creators post this stuff and it's curated and it is highly edited. And that's why when I do my podcast, for example, I shoot my podcast in one take. All 25, 30 minutes, however long it is, I shoot it in one take. I don't cut the camera and it just runs because I don't sell some curated fake BS. That's not the type of creator that I am. So getting back to this expectation versus reality. So like I said, even creators out there are not really putting reality on the table because I guess reality seems not as interesting. So episode 5, I believe it was, I did How the Internet Destroyed Patience, right? So let's talk about this one real quick. So basically it's that 2 people can literally experience the same exact situation and one will feel grateful and the other feels disappointed. Now you have to ask yourself, why is that? Because there's expectations, right? So let's take going out to a restaurant, for example. The expected average would be pleased. Expected perfection, disappointed. In business, expected slow growth, encouraged. Expected instant success, devastated. Marriage, expected problems, normal. Expected perfection is crisis. So these are things we have to take into account, we have to look at. So going back to the restaurant example for a minute. So we go into a restaurant and we expect the food that we ordered to actually be received, right? So if we order a cheeseburger and fries, we don't expect to receive a chicken sandwich with broccoli, right? So that's kind of a number 1 expectation. The number 2 expectation is going to be it's edible and it tastes good, right? So like maybe not perfect, but definitely something that I don't have to send back. It's not undercooked. It's not overcooked. It's not cold. It's edible the way that it's sent to us, right? So that's kind of like the expected average. But if you expect perfection, so for example, let's take Chili's, for example. Okay, so that's like a midline franchise, right? Maybe even low to midline. It's definitely not an upscale dining restaurant. So if you go to Chili's and you order, one of their new chicken sandwiches, right? And your expectation was, well, it's got to be perfect. This has to feel like, look like, taste like Chef Ramsay cooked it himself. Well, you're just setting yourself up for disappointment. That's the point. Same thing goes for business deals. Same thing goes for relationships. Again, business deals, if you expect slow growth, it's good. But if you expect instant success and it doesn't happen, disappointed. And then marriage too, you expect some problems, you're going to work them out, great. But if you expect perfection, well, that's going to turn into a crisis, right? So reality is something that rarely hurts as much as these sometimes subliminal and conscious unmet expectations. And not just the internet right now has kind of ruined this, but Hollywood has ruined a lot of it too. So Hollywood has ruined a lot of relationships because movies sell constant passion and soulmates. That's why one of the most popular genres is romance. Look at 50 Shades of Grey, for example. I've never read it, but I know it's got something to do with that romance category for sure. And I think it sold millions of copies. It's because people love that fantasy. But that's what it is. It's fantasy. It doesn't happen like that in real life. And if it's happened for you in real life, that's great. But you're like 1% of the 1% and you're lucky. So, and they sell this idea of, this effortless chemistry, right? But in reality, guess what? Love is not really exciting. And marriage just becomes routine. People change, people fight, conflict happens. So again, the problem isn't that relationships become ordinary. It's the issue of people expect the relationships to be something extraordinary every day. And that is just not reality. So I'm not saying we need to lower our expectations. I'm saying what we need to do is to match our expectations to reality. And we can apply that across the board. So people often mistake stability for boredom. So that makes peace and calmness actually feel strange to some people. Because, for example, think about if you're married, for example, or you have a long-term boyfriend or girlfriend. And when I say long-term, I mean probably more than a year or two. Think about the first time you met and think about how that felt, the warm fuzzies or the butterflies you got. And even think about the first relations you had with them. And now think about how it is. And it probably feels more dull, for lack of a better term. And that is because it is normal now. Everything has become normal. It doesn't mean that it's bad. It's actually very good. We could segue into something else. I heard a line a few years ago, and I think it's very stupid. I want to share it with you guys. Someone said, "My grandfather always used to say, the guy with the most toys dies happy." And I'm thinking to myself, well, man, that guy either hasn't had a lot of toys or he's just full of shit. Unless you're like hundreds of millions of dollars in net worth and you have tens of millions in liquidity and you can pay somebody, you can have a crew to maintain all your problems, because that's what toys are. Toys meaning boats, yachts, jet skis, four-wheelers, multiple properties, tools, whatever you'd consider to be a toy, some kind of luxury item. That's what he meant by toys. And all a toy is something that has to be maintained. My point is, take it from someone who's had a lot of these toys. And no, I've never bought a boat, because a boat is the thing you can't wait to have and then the thing you can't wait to get rid of. Remember that. Anybody with a boat will tell you that. Now, let's get back to it. The point is, once you've had these things and you've experienced these things, so for example, I bought a couple of side-by-side four-wheelers, right? I thought that was the greatest thing. I've always wanted that. I had one a few years ago and I bought a couple more. And I customized them, put a winch on them and put lights and all this other fancy stuff on them, right? And I thought it was great. Rode the trails, then rode the trails some more, then rode the trails some more. And then, well, I don't know if I've gone and ridden the trails for over a year now, because it's just, I don't know, it's just not like as satisfying as it used to be. It doesn't mean it's a bad thing. But again, that's expectations versus reality. It's like, oh, these toys or this experience will be great. And maybe it is the first time, but then you do it a second time and then you do it every day. The same with shooting for me, right? So obviously, I have a rifle manufacturing company as well. And honestly, a firearm is just a tool for me. And I've been training students to how to use firearms and shoot firearms safely for 15 years. So I don't get excited when I see a gun. I don't get excited when I shoot a gun. I'm just thinking like, wow, that was just like 30 cents. I just pulled the trigger, 30 cents. Like I'm not trying to sound cynical when I say that, but that's just the reality of it. It's just a tool to me. And even my full autos, first couple times I shot the full auto, I always wanted to shoot a full auto Glock. Oh, it was great, And now it's just like, well, I got to bring my my expectations down to reality, because the reality is it's not that fun anymore because it's become normal. So that comes into this other idea of how entrepreneurship is oversold, like totally 100% oversold. Like everyone will say, it's the American dream, own your own business. Well, that's half bullshit, because the social media promotes, the freedom and the Lambos and the passive income. So for example, this guy, Jack Doherty, I should really call him a guy. He's like 22 years old. I guess that qualifies. He started literally flipping crayons and highlighters and water bottles when he was like 12 or 13 years old, put it on YouTube. And I don't know, for some reason, that's what people wanted to consume. So fast forward a few years later, he's rich and famous somehow from doing all this flipping. And now he shows off his Lambos and all this and that in his house. But the truth is, he doesn't know how to run a business. He doesn't run a business. Honestly, I don't really know what he runs or what he sells. I guess he's making money off YouTube ad revenue. He has 10 million subscribers. So, but again, that's expectation versus reality, because what he's doing, it's not really reality. Whatever he's doing to make money, I mean, it's working for him, but it's not going to necessarily work for you. So the reality of it is payroll, taxes, legal issues. I always say if you become large enough as a business, you'll eventually be sued, and customer complaints, and you're always going to have bad months too. So the irony is here that most business owners don't really hate businesses. They hate the difference between what's expected and what actually became. So business isn't necessarily harder than people think. It's just usually less glamorous. And that's why these creators, like this guy I mentioned, they actually kind of flip that script now, because the traditional, bootstrap entrepreneurship is completely different nowadays. It really is. It's just completely flipped. It's almost like talent is secondary. Good products are secondary. Even with music. I mean, look at a lot of rap music out there now. You don't really need talent. You just need an audience. So really, that's the key now. So happiness lives in reality, not this fantasy. So suffering often comes from arguing with reality. And, they say, the Buddhists, which I agree with, they say that attachment is the root of all suffering. So you have to remember that too. So examples like, I shouldn't have done this. This shouldn't happen. This isn't fair. But reality doesn't like to negotiate. Maturity means replacing why is this happening with what does this actually require, so it doesn't happen again, or for me to change something. So peace is something that comes when expectations are aligned with reality. So basically, we could give a little advantage to the system breaker method, and that's my method. And if you haven't already checked it out, you can go ahead and check out the website, and the book is for sale on the website and at Barnes & Noble, the System Breakers Guide, because system breakers don't expect constant motivation or perfection in relationships or smooth businesses or fast success, because we live in that gray area between pessimism and optimism. We're not either. We are realists. We live inside of realism. Okay? So I plan for and I expect setbacks and problems and delays and boredom and stress. And you know why? Because I understand that reality is not broken, because reality is reality. 2 + 2 is 4, whether you're having your best day or your most shitty day. That doesn't change, and the world still keeps turning. So when expectations become realistic, then your resilience increases exponentially. So resilience isn't about being tough, okay? It's about having accurate expectations. So I'll leave you with this. Bring everything together. Most disappointment in life is not caused by this thing we call reality. It's caused by this narrative and this story that we've developed and we've told ourselves what reality is supposed to look like. And the larger the gap between expectations and reality, the more miserable you actually become. But when you stop demanding perfection from your life and your relationships and your businesses, and most importantly, yourself, you'll notice that something interesting starts to happen. And reality stops feeling like failure. So a lot of people aren't losing to reality. They're simply losing to unrealistic expectations.